What I've found with people who are studying NLP, whether they're a beginner or someone who is advanced, is they tend to struggle with the same thing. The thing that slows them down, holds them back in progressing in NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, tends to be the overall understanding of what really is NLP, what are we really doing when we're learning NLP. Because most people, I think, have been drawn to NLP because someone who is famous, like Tony Robbins, or someone who has done something effectively endorses it. And that is often what has drawn you to NLP. And think about that for a second. What really drew you to even being curious about NLP? Maybe you haven't even started yet. Maybe you're not even a beginner. You're just curious about NLP, so that's what brought you here. Maybe you have started. You consider yourself a beginner. Maybe you consider yourself more advanced. Do you really feel like you know what NLP is and what you're using it for? Is what you're using it for, is it effective? Is it working for you? I think when a lot of people get honest with themselves, they admit that they don't really understand it that well. And they might have a stack of certifications. And this gets into what I've said many times is that mainly the certifications are a distraction. There's also another distraction, and that is technique itself, NLP techniques. And people tend to think, for lack of an understanding about NLP, is that it's a system of techniques. It's not really. And this is what causes people to focus on technique so much. Well, I want to learn another technique and another technique. And I remember being a resource coach for other NLP trainers and people being so focused on that. Well, I just want to learn another technique. And I would be like, well, how well did you learn the one that you learned yesterday? Most NLP programs don't even give you time to practice anymore. And then there are some that last longer. And they do give you one shot at practicing a technique once. And then people are ready to move on and learn another technique. And so they do this over and over again. And they might have like 20 techniques that they think they've learned because they practiced them once. And then they wonder why they struggle with NLP. They wonder why they struggle to be effective with that technique with themselves or with clients. And the truth is they haven't really understood what is behind the technique. And that's why we don't want to put too much focus and too much emphasis on a technique. And what we really want to do is we want to think of NLP in terms of a model, because we create models of reality. That is how we navigate reality. We do not navigate reality directly, as we often think that we do. We create models of reality to navigate it, to understand it, to make sense of the world around us. And this is often why people say that logic and facts don't change people's minds. The reason for that is someone has created a model of reality, which is based on some fact, some real life experience, plus what they want to believe, plus what they want to make, how they want to make meaning of that. And then if you go throwing facts and logic and things that don't fit with that model of reality, it's just going to bounce right off, because that's very chaotic for a person to disrupt their model of reality by introducing something new to it. And this is even more reason why we should be learning NLP, because when you understand that, and when you understand your own map of reality, how you've modeled reality and created that, then you can change it. You can accept new information. You can integrate that new information so that you progress, so that you evolve, so that you get better. Well, I want to take even more of a step back from that and think about what is it that we really want to do with NLP. If we were to take it to its fullest potential, what can we really do with NLP? Because I think most people are thinking about it in terms of, well, I want to accomplish something. And that really is how NLP first started. You have a desired state and you have a present state. The present state is, I don't have what I want. The desired state is what I'm going to experience when I have it. And so much of NLP started out that way. And, everything has to start in somewhere. And it actually is very effective at helping you achieve what you want. It's just what you'll start to find when you actually can start making NLP techniques work, and that comes with practice, is that you can accomplish a lot of things, but that doesn't necessarily create more meaning in your life. It doesn't necessarily create purpose and fulfillment. And this was one of my experiences when I started getting good at NLP, and I was taking a lot of trainings, I was practicing a lot, and I started to shift my life, started accomplishing things, started understanding things in a new way. It was a really wonderful time. I was around the age of 34 to 35, and it felt like I was sort of reborn. I could now take control of my life and do what I wanted with it. But then I ran into another plateau. And this is where I really started to learn what I'm talking about here. Because to get through that plateau, I had to understand where those limitations were that I was imposing on myself so that I could get beyond them. So I had restructured my map of reality using NLP, but what happened was that restructuring became a new constraint as well. So if you go back to as far as when you were first born, you started constructing these models of reality in order to understand the world around you, in order to survive. You have a mother or a father or whoever else was taking care of you, and you model them to understand what they're doing and how they're doing and how to navigate that. And you understand that these people are the people who make life possible for you. And so that's a model of reality. And then you get sent off to school, and you have to start understanding social dynamics and authority and how to navigate that. So you're creating all these models of reality to help navigate it. But what happens is that over time, typically, those models become very limited because you're still growing and you're still being introduced into these different contexts that are almost like new realities that you have to figure out and then model. So if you went to college, then that was a new dynamic and you had to create a model around that. And then eventually you got into the workforce and you had to create a model around that. And at the same time, you're basing them often off of a lot of the old models that you've created. So they have their limitations. So you're living in a model of reality, not reality itself. And if you haven't guessed already who created that reality, it's you. You created that reality. And it is a model of reality, like I said, because it's not reality itself. And it is composed of many models, models from different ages, from different contexts. So if you're unhappy with your life, if you're not enjoying it, if you're not living up to your potential, it's something you're creating. And this is not about blame and shame. And this is not about taking someone who may be suffering a severe hardship in life because of circumstances that is beyond their control. So I'm not going there. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you basically have a roof over your head and you're not in poverty, you're not in a war zone, okay? If you're unhappy with your life, that is something that you're creating. I can comfortably say that. And I know that because throughout my entire life, I was not born into poverty. I was not born into any circumstances that were extremely oppressive or abusive. And yet I was still very much unhappy and had suffered depression twice. And I had my bills paid. I was broke most of my life up until I started learning NLP. But I had a roof over my head. I had my bills were paid. Everything in that sense was fine. My health was good. So there was really, when you look at it, I had every reason and every resource, everything available to me to make my life a meaningful, happy, fulfilling life. I just didn't know how to do that until I learned the tools of NLP. And that's where the techniques are important, because through learning the NLP techniques, you then can start to understand them in the context of a model. And that's how NLP was first created, based on models. The meta model was the very first one. So you could learn one or two language patterns, and that would be equivalent to like an NLP technique. And that's also probably where a lot of you have come to NLP for was sales, persuasion, maybe even seduction. They have these things called language patterns, and you go, oh, I can try that language pattern. And then you try it a few times and you see that it works. And it's exciting when it works. But then when it doesn't work, you don't understand why it doesn't work. Well, if you learn that technique in the context of a bigger model, then it'll start to make more sense. Just like your life, when something's not working, if you can understand what it is in the context of the model that you're creating, it's a lot easier to solve that problem. Einstein once said that you can't solve a problem at the same level in which the problem is being created. So if we can take a step back and look at, well, what is the model itself that contains the problem? And then we can begin to understand much better how to solve that problem, because it's the model itself that is creating the problem. So if you're unhappy with your life, if you're not living up to your potential, if you're not being as effective as you want to be, if you start to understand that in the model in which that problem is being created, now you're onto something different. And this is where we can take NLP to a place that I think few people have really taken it. And that is to understand what creates meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in life. It's not just about accomplishing things. We think that a lot of times, if I just had, fill in the blank, then I would feel worthy. Then I would feel good enough. Then I would feel deserving. And then I could go out and do all the rest of my dreams that I, execute on that. And that's really not how it happens. It's not how it works, because what that does is it puts us in a state of conditions and waiting. And that's just not the way. The way is to understand the model in which you're creating, how you're creating that model. When you can become aware of that, then we can change it. And that is the next part of this, that, if you think I'm saying, oh, it's all your fault that you are the way that you are, and if you're unhappy and all those things, again, turning it into fault and blame is not useful. Taking responsibility for it is extremely useful, because that's really the only true freedom we're ever going to know, when we take full responsibility for our lives, who we are, how I feel, whether or not I'm fulfilled, whether or not I'm living a purposeful life. I cannot control the things that happen in objective reality. And when I say we create our reality, I'm not at all saying that like we bend the universe with our minds. There's a lot of people who are into that kind of thinking. I don't agree with that. There is something going on out here that is happening. And the only way that we can sort it out and make meaning of it is through creating a model. And so that's why I say that we're not interacting with reality objectively. We're not interacting with it directly. We cannot handle all the information that's hitting our five senses all at once. We have to code it to make sense of it. And when we understand that's not about, the tornado that came through my town and destroyed my house. Did I create that with my map of reality? No, you did not. How you respond to that, the meaning you make of that, how you feel about that, yes, that's all being created from you. And that is something that for most people feels like you have no control over. You have no agency over. I can't do anything about it. It's just the way that I feel. And that's just not true. And if we fully take responsibility for that, then we can begin to bring this model, how we're making this model, or how we're modeling this, into our awareness. When we can bring it into our awareness, now we can actually change it. We can't change something that we're not aware of. And this is where NLP comes in. NLP is a model for understanding how we create the model, which then creates what we call experience. It used to be said that NLP was the study of the structure of subjective experience, but all experience is subjective. So NLP is about understanding how we structure reality that then creates our subjectivity around it. The analogy I like to use is take a book, and this plays in really well with the linguistic part of NLP because it's Neuro-Linguistic Programming. If you take a book, let's say it's a novel, it's a fictional book, and you read the words of that, you're not actually reading the story. You're reading a code, a map that tells you what to generate in your mind, how to fill in the content. So you can read that book, and 1,000 people can read that same book. And you'll have the same general sense of the meaning of that story. But every one of you generated different images in your mind. The book said, describe the main character. They didn't give you every possible detail because then that would have turned into the entire book. So they gave you enough details for you to fill in the gaps of what the protagonist looks like. What does the hero look like? And then they give you enough of the details to fill in the gaps, to construct the story in your mind as you go. But if we were looking to everybody's head while they're reading that book, you're going to see something different. But at the end of it, everyone is going to have round about the similar meaning of whatever they made of the story. They could describe the story to you and its theme, and it's going to be very similar, even though the content that was filled in is going to be so different for every person. And so this is what we call a map of reality. This is a structure of reality, and that's what language is. So everything that I'm saying here, I'm not creating that reality in front of you as I'm explaining it. You're doing that. I'm just giving you the code to do it. It's kind of like DNA. The DNA is or is it RNA? I'm not great with science, but it basically gives your body the instructions of how to constantly keep recreating who you are physically, because you have cells that are dying all the time and regenerating. Well, it's either the DNA or the RNA that carries those instructions of your body to keep regenerating. And that's why, you keep looking the same, except, we do get older. And that's whenever the instructions, what causes us to look older is the instructions start getting obscured. There's like, I don't know, lack of a better word, the instructions get kind of mangled and dirty. And that's why we start to age. But roundabout, you still look like the same person because it's carrying the same instructions. And so that's what a model does. It carries the code, the instructions of how to generate this reality in your mind. So when you read a book, that's exactly what you're doing, because what you're really reading is words. And those words, other than what the words look like, they're not images, they're not movies, but you're creating that in your mind. And this is the extraordinary thing. And we can transfer meaning to other people through language. We can also do it through gestures. So we're basically have a code that we can transfer to other people, and then they can understand that meaning as well, even though they're going to fill in different content. So what NLP does is it's pointing at, we point at structure, and we look at structure, and it's really the structure that tells us what meanings to make of what we're looking at or what we're hearing, what we're seeing. When you can understand those structures, and this is not now I understand it and then that's it. It's an ongoing practice. It's an ongoing practice of understanding those structures that create meaning for you. It's also a personal journey. It's a very practical journey, and it comes from practicing techniques. So I'm not at all saying you shouldn't practice techniques. It's in the practicing of these techniques that we start to generate the understanding, the wisdom behind how we create our experiences. But here's the thing. I've met people who were really advanced in NLP. They knew a lot of techniques, they knew a lot of processes, and they were very effective using them on themselves and using them with clients, other people. Or maybe they were very persuasive. Maybe they were in sales and they could use them very effectively. But they still had this glaring blind spot of like what you can really do with NLP and creating that meaning that you want in life. So the reason why I think this is basically the same problem that beginners have as advanced people have. As a beginner, you're still like not really understanding what NLP is. And it took me a few years before I felt like I could actually grasp it well enough to then try to explain it. Because that's the biggest question I always get is, well, what is it really? What is NLP? And it is not an easy question to answer. But like I said, I think most beginners are getting into it because they hear it's really effective and they heard it from a trusted source. So they say, okay, I'm going to go and learn this thing. And they do, in the beginning, have a few experiences where they see the effectiveness of it. And they keep going at it. And keep learning another technique and another technique, and then it just seems like NLP is this chaos of scattered techniques everywhere, and they still don't know, well, what is it really? I think the most profound thing about NLP, if you're willing to take it far enough, is that you start to understand that really what is the most important thing in everyone's life is the meaning we make of it. Is that a positive thing? Is that a really good thing? Is it a really fulfilling thing? Do I feel like I have purpose? Now, a lot of people look to things like religion for purpose, or they look to the roles that they play in life. Like if you're a parent, you do feel a tremendous sense of purpose. I got to raise these kids, these little beings. But what happens when the kids are then grown adults and they leave home? A lot of people will suffer a depression, or they call it empty nest syndrome. And what's happening there is they derive their purpose from something that passed, that went on, because after a while you don't raise your kids anymore. They're adults. They're off on their own. Or what about when you so identify with a job or a career, and then you retire? You get to that age where either no one wants to hire you, or you're just kind of done doing the work, and you let that go. Well, it feels like you're losing a piece of your identity, that you derived meaning and purpose from that. Well, what if we could understand how we're creating meaning and purpose and fulfillment, instead of it seeming like something that just happens to us? Because that's how most people are experiencing it. I get these powerful experiences of meaning and fulfillment, and then they fade and they move on. And so it feels like, well, they happen to me, and they don't happen to me enough, and I'd like to have more of them, but I can't force it. I can't make it happen. And we don't want to try to force that. But you can absolutely learn how you're structuring your experiences and your reality itself to then create meaning and purpose in your life and actually sustain it. That, to me, is the most empowering thing I could possibly think of in life. If you start your NLP journey understanding that that's where it's leading, I think if every beginner understood that, they would stick with NLP a lot longer. They would stick with it, and because that's where we want to get to. And for advanced people, that is the next level of advancement. So most people consider themselves advanced if they can use NLP techniques effectively. And I wouldn't disagree with that. I would say, yeah, that is an advanced level of skill. If you want to take it to mastery, NLP mastery, that's that next level of truly understanding how do you create purpose and meaning in your life. And I'm not saying that you can't, that it's not necessary to practice. It's absolutely necessary to practice. You do need to practice those techniques. I think that's another thing that people want to skip past. They want to just go straight to the understanding. When I practiced, when I first started practicing Ashtanga yoga, they kept telling me over and over, it's 99% practice. But I was like, well, okay, so I'm not sure why I'm doing this yoga practice. And my teacher kept saying, well, it's only 1% theory. It's only 1% philosophy. You'll find it in the practice. And so I kept practicing because I trusted her. And then she was absolutely right. I started experiencing these meanings and these wonderful things through the practice. And then I would come to her and say, well, this is what I'm getting. And she was like, well, wow, that's interesting. You're able to put words to this really well. I never think of it as that. I just do it. So I want to say NLP is 99% practice. Maybe that's not 100% accurate, but it's really close to that. And about 1% theory. And what that theory does is it just guides you in the direction that is going to benefit you most, in a direction that is really infinite. And that 1% that I'm giving you that 1% right now. And that 1% is, if you're not taking NLP to the extent of understanding how you create meaning, purpose, value, and fulfillment in life, if you're not there yet, keep going because it gets so much more exciting. There's so much more there. And for me, I grew up in a very religious household and I was taught that the only way you're going to find meaning and purpose in life is if you follow this religion. And I got to a point in my life, especially after seeing a lot of cognitive dissonance among people who were preaching that, a lot of hypocrisy in the people who were preaching that. And I was thinking to myself, well, if this religion is so good and so powerful that way, why aren't the people who are preaching it following it that way? Obviously, they don't truly believe that the only way they're going to find purpose and meaning in life is following this religion, because they're not really following it. They're just preaching it. So I eventually left that behind, and I just thought, okay, this whole meaning and purpose fulfillment thing, I just suppose it's something that you kind of make up, and maybe you even make it up to this extent that you know that you're making it up and you're kind of fooling yourself. Maybe Kierkegaard has it right. It doesn't matter if, Christianity is real or not. It's just going to help you if you just believe it. And so I was kind of in that area for quite a while. But it wasn't until I started this NLP journey and I did hit a plateau. And that, like I said, the lack of understanding what I'm giving you now what was holding me back. And then I met my mentor, Steve Andreas, and he could tell I was really, really after something. And I was just hitting him with one question after another until he finally says, I think I know what you're after. And I created this model, the self-concept model. Go learn it, and I think it's going to answer most, if not all, of your questions. And he couldn't have been more right. And the way that Steve would frame that model is like, well, this is the key to self-esteem. When you align with your values, you get self-esteem. We take it even further than that, and we transform our aspects of ourself into what we value. And then that makes your self-esteem go up and stay there, and you maintain that. And because when you believe it, and that then shapes your reality. Belief is another code of reality. It's another map or model of reality, a belief about something. The most powerful beliefs are the beliefs about who you are, because from the beliefs of who you are, that tells the other beliefs that you have what to believe about the world around you. Who you are dictates the beliefs you have about everything else. And so he was, I think, a bit mild about explaining how powerful that model is, because I took it as far as I felt like I could possibly take it at the time. And now I've since realized that it really is an infinite model that you can just keep growing with, because it is a truly content-free model that is pure structure. And so if it's pure structure, then you're constantly, as long as you're alive, or inserting the content that's necessary for it. And I took it to the extent of transforming all of my highest values into qualities of who I am. And when that happened, the combination of all those values, all of those qualities now feeling certain and solid, the qualities that I valued most, then I experienced fulfillment. I experienced meaning and purpose, and it was coming from me, and I wasn't like having to make it up. It was just there. And because it was there, I just aligned with it. And so my behavior, my actions all aligned with it. So not only was I feeling it at the moment, and still do, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. You become more of what you value when you believe you are what you value. The way a lot of people are going at this is they have this belief that if they accomplish a certain amount of things, then they will be worthy, then they will be deserving, they will be good enough. But if you go at it that way, then you have to maintain that. You have to keep accomplishing and chasing that and trying to keep that elevated. And that's just a lot of work. It's just easier to realize there is no such thing as self-worth, that you can't measure your value, you can't measure your worth. You're the only one who can validate that for yourself. So stop putting it out there as like, well, when I accomplish, or when people give me respect, and when people like me, then I will feel significant. That takes a lot more work. It's a huge burden, and then it doesn't even pay off. Whereas you can restructure how you think, how you organize that information of how you think and what you believe. You can start looking at your maps of reality, eliciting them to find out, well, what have I been adhering to? What structure have I been using to navigate the world around me? that is probably outdated at this point and needs to be restructured. You have to be able to elicit that structure in order to do that. And that's what NLP is. And when you start to understand that, and you understand it through practicing techniques, you understand it through practicing techniques within a model, you take that to the next level of understanding how you have created the model in which you're living in. And again, this is an ongoing thing. You're never going to have it all completely sorted out. This is an ongoing practice. But if you think about it, what could be more important than this? What could be more important than understanding how you are structuring your reality day to day that is creating the way that you feel, whether that's bad or that's good, and then optimizing that model so that you get the most fulfillment, you get the most meaning, the most purpose, the most value out of your life experiences. I can't think of anything that is more important than learning that and doing that. What I want you to know more than anything is that NLP is something you've been doing your whole life because you've been creating models your whole life. You have been seeking meaning and fulfillment and value. We are meaning-making machines. We're constantly making meaning. And there is a structure in how we do that. And that's even when we call something meaningless. That's still a category that we're creating, meaninglessness. And I have many times in my life, I felt my life was meaningless. I felt I was meaningless. That's still applying a meaning to something. That's a categorization, which is applying a meaning to that. In my depressions, when I look back on them, I can now see the structure that was creating those depressions. Because I wasn't aware of it, I couldn't do anything about it. Went to therapy, got kind of talked out of it. Well, the very first depression that I had, a professor of mine who knew NLP, in one session, the depression was over because he didn't have to go through my childhood and all the content. He went straight to the structure. And he knew that if he could integrate two parts of me that were in conflict, then the depression was going to go away, and it did. And so he worked in structure, which is why it happened so fast. And I'm not kidding. It was a 1 hour session, and months of depression was just gone. So this NLP is it can be challenging to learn. It can be challenging to master. It makes it much easier when you realize that you have in fact been doing this your whole life. You just have not been aware of it. So it's a matter of making it conscious. And that was why NLP was invented, a model to bring to our awareness how we create models of reality. And it's in these models that tells us what to feel, what meanings to make, how to categorize things, the meaning we make of the world around us, the meaning we make of ourselves. And if we can understand how we're structuring and creating meaning, then we can create the meanings we want. That's what I mean by fulfillment and value. So imagine if you could understand that structure and then create those meanings for your life and for yourself. Another analogy I like to use is movies. And movies have a very definite structure to them. And if a movie is really good, we don't pay attention to the structure. All we see is the content. And we think it's the content that is making us feel what we feel about a movie. But it's actually not, because you can probably say you've seen movies that maybe the acting was good, but the story was terrible. It was meaningless. Or, there were certain aspects of the movie you could say, okay, I could appreciate that, but the movie itself was empty. It was meaningless. When movies are done well, it all comes together. You have good content, of course, but it's mainly in the structure, and that's what the hero's journey is. And you've probably seen this, and if you've ever studied story writing, screenwriting, or even personal development, they talk about the hero's journey. There's a call to action, and there's all those steps. There's I forget the guy's name, Joseph Campbell, who identified all these structures that that no matter the culture, the country, all these structures seem rather universal and enduring stories and legends. And so when we watch a movie, we're not paying attention to the structure because we have the content in front of us, but the structure is telling us what to feel about it, what meaning to make of the movie. And so by the time it's over, we walk away with a meaning of that movie, and we can describe that meaning or the way that it made us feel. Now, of course, because we're consciously aware of the content, like the actors and the things that they said and the plot points, we're not paying attention to the structure. But if the structure works on an unconscious level, and that's what makes it so incredibly powerful. Now, you can't have structure without content. You can't have content without structure. So I'm not trying to pit one as being better than the other. It's just when we want to look at what creates meaning or what tells us what meanings to make of something, it's more going to be found in the structure. And that's the part that is most deeply unconscious. You learn NLP to be able to learn how to bring that into consciousness. Because once you do, now you can change it. And like I said, you've been doing this your whole life. You've been creating models your whole life of your reality. Now it's time to understand how you're creating that model or those models. And when you do, you can change them in order to create the meaning, fulfillment, value, and purpose in your life that you want to live. And when you start doing that, it's the most amazing thing. And I think this is, when they were creating NLP, they didn't even understand quite yet that was the potential of NLP. And a few people have actually taken it there. So whether you're a beginner or you're advanced, put that in the forefront of your mind that that's where you want to go. That's the vision. That's why you're learning NLP. That's why you're going to take it to its fullest potential. Because in doing so, you're going to unlock your fullest potential. Okay, I'll look at a few questions here. Could you propose a simple book about the main points of NLP I could apply in my everyday life? That's really difficult because it's really hard to learn NLP from books. And I get this request a lot that they want to know which books to read. I think you're going to get more out of trainings. I've been working on a book for years now. I keep saying every year, I think this is the year I'm finally going to publish it, but then I go back and I rewrite it. So I will have a book eventually come out that explains a lot of what I'm explaining here. I recommend anything from Steve and Connie Ray Andreas. I think they wrote the best books of NLP. They don't talk a lot about the stuff that I'm talking about here. They tell you in those books how to learn NLP techniques and the best way to do them. They don't really take it to the level of the meanings that I'm talking about here, typically. All right. Okay. Not a lot of questions today, and that's fine. So yeah, feel free to ask questions later. We do have an NLP training. I think you're going to get the most out of NLP trainings, more so than books. And we offer a practitioner training. That's really inexpensive, so pretty much anybody can access it. And then not this weekend, but next weekend, we're going to be doing a live free training. We'll be putting out more information on that. All right. Take care, everyone.